All right, well, welcome everybody to backlog refinement for the Crossplane stacks sig. And we're just going to be going over the 0.3 release and, you know, the work that we've kind of identified is like the major bucket. So we've gotten, you know, GitLab working, that we demoed that at KubeCon back in Barcelona. And so since then, we've been hard at work on, you know, default resource classes, and we're working on strongly typed resource classes instead of the resource class enhancements that increases portability, as well as enhanced validation. So that's stuff that's in flight, and that's being worked by the services sig. And so that's all kind of in flight right now. And then for this sig, for stack sig, we're focused on getting infrastructure stacks out of tree and helping with a couple or three aspects of that. And so providing out of tree capability for the infrastructure stacks, GCP, AWS, and Azure. Initially focused on single region secure connectivity between the Kubernetes target clusters, and then the cloud services, the deployments in those clusters need to talk to. So like Postgres, MySQL, you know, caches like Redis, buckets, and so forth. So the first epic that we have identified here is for the stacks manager, being able to support the notion of an app stack versus an infrastructure stack, where an infrastructure stack is really providing the set of resources that you would kind of build your app stacks on top of, whether it be like a Kubernetes cluster. I think we have leftovers from Seafair flying by at the moment. Sorry about that. And then connecting that to like with Cloud SQL and Cloud Memory Store and buckets, but then also adding networking aspects like you know, networks and subnets, or VPCs and subnets, and so forth. And so, you know, for the app stack, that would be something that you build yourself. And so we have an example down here, like a portable WordPress app stack. It's KubeBuilder based, published to the registry in 572. And so you'd be able to take that portable app stack and deploy it onto any of these infrastructure stacks because it was designed as a portable app stack. We also support non-portable app stacks if you want to consume, you know, differentiated or best of breed services in a particular cloud provider. But, you know, Crossplane enables you to do both. So that's this first part for Stacks Manager, and we'll drill down to that in just a second. The other big thing that Stack Squad will be helping with predominantly, Jared, is getting the infrastructure stacks actually moved out of the current Crossplane repo and into separate repos for each infrastructure stack, and getting them packaged up and built as stacks and then published to the registry, so that kind of like all the build infrastructure and so forth for that is taken care of as part of this. The services sig is then going to handle the infrastructure stacks for GCP, AWS, and Azure, and basically getting them onto the new controller pattern, and then adding in the secure connectivity for GCP and AWS. And in talking with Hash Dan this morning, he's going to put in the secure connectivity as an Aspire target for Azure as well. So these first two are stacks sig, and then this last one here is basically providing an initial stacks CLI experience, whether it's a standalone or a kubectl plugin, kind of focused around like three initial commands, mainly like build and push, and then aspirationally like an init type of a thing. That would provide like an initialized scaffolding for a, you know, KubeBuilder based controller of sorts, and you know, having all the necessary YAML and whatnot. So that's kind of getting the infrastructure stacks in place and the work around that. And then docs and examples. Wait for a second.
I can't wait for Seafair to start.
I know, man. It's like getting ready for the weekend. So we're also going to be publishing an infrastructure stack developer guide, And so that will make it easy to support two scenarios. So one is with this GCP infrastructure stack or an AWS one, if I just want to add an additional cloud service capability to that stack, can I do that? Even as simple as like fixing a bug in one of the controllers, that, you know, basically how would I go about contributing to that infrastructure stack? And then also, if you want to, you know, create your own infrastructure stack for a cloud that doesn't have support yet, whether it be like Alibaba Cloud or Tencent or DigitalOcean, et cetera, that's how we'd be able to enable the community to go and very efficiently build these infrastructure stacks. And then the last couple ones here are focused on just getting the docs refreshed. This is more kind of validating that everything is up to date, as well as, you know, providing an updated Crossplane IO, updating the roadmap, and the README on the core repo and the architecture diagram and so forth. And the last one, which I'm going to be adding an issue for here, I already created it, I just need to link it, are basically examples for DevOps pipelines, whether it be like a Jenkins pipeline or a GitLab pipeline or even a GitOps flow using these stacks, and just showing examples of how that works to kind of make it easier to get started quickly in your environment. So I guess I'll pause there to see if at a high level all of that makes sense, questions, comments, suggestions, and then we can dive into each individual epic.
Seems fine to me. I was thinking that some of the stuff might be a little more specific and suggesting implementation than it needs to be, but you know, like we said, it's a rough pass, and overall I felt pretty good about it.
Cool. Okay, so the first one, Stacks Manager. So we can just dive into that real quick. So, you know, Jared took a pass at framing this up, and we iterated on that a bit. So has everybody had a chance to read this? Any questions, comments, or suggestions on this one? And then down at the bottom, we have a set of related issues. And so that's kind of feature scoped issues. So we're trying to target, as you can see here, you know, labels for like epic and then the group. So this is an epic, and then having the sub issues be kind of more like feature focused. So these are like the 5 things that we want to do, you know, within this epic. And so that's just the draft list there.
Were we expected to read these before this meeting? I did not.
It must be like at the center of where they all intersect, with the jets flying over. Ideally, so we sent the links out yesterday, but if you haven't had a chance to read them, we can take time to do that now. And also, we're going to be meeting back tomorrow, so maybe it would be better to just kind of review these async, and then we'll do a turn of the crank. We've also taken a stab at putting, you know, kind of tentative owners for each of these. And so the intention is that the owner can then kind of drive that based on the framing, and then elaborate a proposed set of features underneath that we could then review back tomorrow. So like, I don't know, Marcus, is this something that you would want to take for the 0.3 release? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, I mean, Jared's going to come up with some of these pieces, but you know, I can glue them together and build on anything that's missing.
Okay.
I look forward to the implementation side of it.
Yeah, totally. So basically, we have the design doc, so we have an issue open for that, and so that's in flight. And so I think that's going to be like the first major thing that we need to clear. and then actually getting the isolation model for app and infrastructure stacks implemented. And so we're going to need, 2 features created. And so maybe that's something that, Marcus, you could work with Jared to kind of rapidly iterate to the definition of that. And then we could review that. If you took an initial stab at maybe doing it before we met back tomorrow, then we could just do a quick scan of that, and that would be ready for sprint planning on Monday morning.
Phil, is that stacks, sig, backlog grooming, is that already on the calendar?
For tomorrow, yeah, just a half hour, so it's a super short one.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like 11:30 to noon.
I see it now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is the isolation model about requiring different levels of permission to install different types of stacks?
Yes, and like what permissions those stacks when they're running have as well, like the scope that they can interact with the control plane.
I see. Okay.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this one? Does this make sense? And then Marcus, are you good kind of driving this? If there's any changes you want to this list, it's basically go in and make them, and then we can just review them tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fine. There you go. Something that I keep thinking of whenever I get locked up in this RBAC model and how we would want to restrict things here is I keep remembering that ultimately it's just a REST API, and that helps to simplify things when you think like when all you're faced with is a bunch of URL endpoints and who should have access to these things. I think there's maybe some hidden nuance, but I like to think that it can be simplified to that when thinking through this problem.
Yeah, that is a representation of the resources that you are restricting access to. That's accurate, I'd say.
Nice. And my comment would be, Marcus, we should coordinate on like what the experience might be for interacting with these things and doing the install and that type of thing.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of what's queued up, I guess, for Stacks Manager. We can move on to the next one if there's no other changes, and then just circle back, Marcus, after you get a chance to kind of elaborate that further and any tweaks and tunes that need to be done to that, and then we'll be ready to hit the ground running on Monday with a couple of those elaborated features. And for the elaborated features, we're looking ideally to follow the pattern that Nick had put in place with his phraseology, which Jared actually just pointed out was a real word.
Javad.
Oh, is it Javad? Oh.
I had no idea it was a real word.
He's like, you guys didn't make this up. This is real.
Yeah, you're not, no more patent pending, Phil.
I know, right? Oh, no.
Phraseology?
Exactly. So it's kind of like, why are we even doing this, right? Like, what problem are we solving with this epic or this feature? And so as we go and kind of get the features defined, it'd be nice to have a similar type of, these are the burning questions that we want to answer. What does it look like when we're done with the feature? Paragraphs, bullets, all the stuff that kind of, you want to include in that. The demo, how do we demonstrate this functionality? Is super interesting because it really makes you think through like, okay, what are we actually going to do? And when you start looking at it from that perspective, it's not what is this going to do technically, but like what is this going to do from a user's perspective? And then that can actually help in the framing of the related issues, because then it's like walking through the steps that the user would do. So as an example, if we come over to the GCP infrastructure stack as an example that Nick wrote up. Nick did a really awesome job, like just elaborating these epics in a great detail. So this is like a really great one to look at as a reference. And so he basically, bulleted out like how would we demonstrate this? And it's like, well, you'd install core Crossplane, install the GCP stack, and then you'd create these network and subnet resources, and then create this using the secure networking, and then deploying the portable WordPress onto that cluster. And so then when you start looking at the user stories, it kind of maps into beyond the design doc, like, hey, in order to do this step, right, that's actually going to be like a feature, right? And so then what I can demonstrate is I can actually, as a user, do this step in the demo when that feature is complete. And then like this one down here kind of maps to this one down here, right? So it's like trying to make it more user focused. So like going through the demo can then actually help with the definition of the, or getting the features defined in a way that's kind of more user centric. So it's an interesting exercise to go through as we're kind of getting the ethics elaborated. So I thought I'd just mention that.
I think one of the pieces that we're going to need to do, and I'll make sure to annotate it on the issue, is figure out what we're going to call these things. The infra stacks, we were kicking around an alternate name for that. And I think that one of the design ideas that Jared has is perhaps going to make a different class of extensions and extension requests, that maybe there would be the infra extension requests and infra extensions and app extension requests and app extensions.
Mm-hmm.
So like that stuff's probably going to have to happen pretty early, renaming it and splitting up the two concepts.
Totally. And so that's what we need to get elaborated in the design doc. So if you want to start dropping like those comments in here, or as you're framing up, this one, that would be a fine thing to do.
Yeah. I'm wondering where I can weigh in on that other than right now.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Oh, well, so I'm wondering, is the desire to have different types driven by wanting to have an easy way to manage the different sets of capabilities and permissions?
Yeah, I think so, Daniel, where, like because CRDs can be gated behind different permissions, where, it seems to me to make sense of like a infrastructure stack installation request sort of CRD that's focused on that only particular roles get access to that. And so that they're the only ones that are allowed to install that type of thing, versus an app, app stack installation request that, more people could be a broader access to, allowed to install those.
Oh, so it's about controlling who's allowed to actually install.
Yeah, that's one thing. That's one big thing that I think of for it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I guess the reason I was asking is I'm wondering if we're unnecessarily conflating the type of the stack with the security model for using stacks and interacting with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe that's something we could kind of take async to the design doc discussion. And so hopefully the design doc will frame up, as we're kind of following this, like what problem we're solving, kind of like the concerns the design doc should address, and then what it looks like when we're done. And so that would be like an opportunity to like provide async feedback on that there. And then as the design doc's actually going through PR, we could provide feedback there. So maybe those are some good opportunities for like having a more detailed discussion about that specific topic here.
Cool.
But thanks for raising that. I mean, that's we want to make it as simple as possible. So yeah. Okay. Any other topics here before we move on real quick? Okay. So the next one, moving the infrastructure stacks into separate repos. So Jared was talking with Muvafiq, and Muvafiq's going to take the QBuilder 2 portion of this. But then the stacks team is basically going to do the breaking them out into separate repos, packaging them as a stack, and getting them published to the registry. And so I think Jared's going to take a point on this. But I guess I'll just pause here and see if there's any questions or comments on this one.
I guess one initial comment, I would be interested in interacting with the stack at least at some point as part of the research for informing what the developer experience for interacting with stacks would be like, since we'll have an actual stack at some point.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point.
But we also do at this point at least have a stack that exists that is published to the Docker Hub registry, the sample extension stack, or sorry, whatever it's called. Like that, there is an existing stack that's already out there at least that could help you.
The one with its own repo in the sample extension repo?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I'll follow up about that more with you after this then.
I've got one that works too.
Okay.
Awesome.
Meta controller one, mock meta controller one. Jared, were you actually going to be doing the separation? I thought that it was maybe going to let the services team try to hash it out a little bit.
I think that we're going to need to do the first one. What it's been sounding like is that that we'll need to do the GCP one as the first, to add the metadata to it and a build system around it, etc., to create and publish the stack. But then they could do the other ones with that as a pattern in place.
I gotcha. I was right. I assumed that we would be loading up the stack metadata. I was asking about the separating it out into a separate repo.
I think those are close enough related that it makes sense to do it all at the same time.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so if there's any tweaks and tunes, and then if we want to get some of these queued up, so I think Mubathik was going to be focusing in on this one next. So if we could get a feature issue created for that, and then kind of scoped, I think that would be a fine thing to do. That's probably going to land first thing on Monday, if not sooner. Yeah, I think this is pretty straight ahead at this point. And then we have the demo here. So what we're saying is that when we're done, we should be able to, for all the stacks, install them, configure the default resource class and provide creds, install the WordPress app stack. That's the portable WordPress app stack on top of it, and then instantiate instances of WordPress using that stack and demonstrate that it's working. So that'll be how we make sure that we kind of keep everything working kind of end-to-end as a end-to-end type test.
Is this the install WordPress app stack step? Is that referring to installing one per provider?
Yeah, exactly. And so infrastructure stacks right now, you would install, you can install multiple infrastructure stacks on a given Crossplane instance, but default resource classes are currently global. So in this configuration, only one of them would be kind of the default. And so the portable WordPress app stack relies on the defaults being defined in the Crossplane instance. So yeah, it would be typically one per environment.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. The other thing that popped up is that we don't really have kind of the validate end-to-end here. So I'm going to go and grab that from the GCP one and then bring that over. And then it's not going to be securely deployed securely, but it'll be deployed. We probably want to do that per cool. Yeah, so feel free to go in and then tweak that. like. Okay, so then we'll skip over these three. I guess we can just, super briefly bring them up just to, so you can kind of see those. So Nick's elaborated all of this. It's adding in networking constructs. That's kind of like the main thing. It's moving to the general managed reconciler. Then we're going to be validating it end-to-end with the portable WordPress stack, updating the README. And then there's an API status table that we'll be updating and then linking to the new GCP stack. So you all can kind of read this, offline, I guess, because it's not in our SIG here, but just to kind of be generally aware. And then also we're going to be adding in content for cloud memory store and buckets in addition to what we have defined here just for the Cloud SQL instances. So that's work that MoveOffic's going to be doing to kind of get this epic fully elaborated. And then the AWS infrastructure stack is very similar. With the names changed to protect the innocent and, basically just using RDS instead of Cloud SQL, but it should be very, very similar. And then Javad's going to be adding in the AWS section of the design doc here, building on what Nick has provided up here for GCP. So that's kind of going on there. And then Azure is very similar. Dan is basically going to be working on that, and then he's going to be adding in secure connectivity as an Aspire goal. So that's kind of something that might get added in just because they're making a lot of progress and have pretty high velocity. So he's going to tackle the strongly typed stuff and then come in and do the Azure infrastructure stack controller pattern refactor, and then probably just tackle this single region secure connectivity in the 0.3 timeframe by the end of August. So excited about that. So the next one is Stacks V1 CLI. So any questions on those briefly before we cruise to this next one?
Are we trying to get all three split out?
Oh yeah, yeah. So that'll happen in August. So they'll be split out here, and then we're doing the Cube Builder 2 refactor, and so MoveOffic is basically starting to work on that right away because he just wrapped up with his previous thing, the managed reconciler, I think. And then yeah, so he'll probably be doing Cube Builder 2. These will get split out by Jared, and then MoveOffic will be working that, and then Javad will be working that, and Dan will be working that, and then they're all feeling pretty good about that for August.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so the next one is the kind of like the initial experience around the Stack CLI or developer experience. And so Jared elaborated this epic. I guess we'll just kind of read it briefly and then see if there's any questions, comments, or suggestions.
Yeah, Daniel, this is definitely one of the ones that, has like the high level goals are kind of understood a little bit, or what the high level experience is, but definitely looking to you to flesh this out and drive this, in a very complete way.
Sweet.
You're the expert on this one, buddy.
Yes.
Yeah, so Daniel, so if you want to take a pass at like looking over this, making any proposed changes, tweaking kind of the proposed features, this is all draft right now. And so, if you could do that over before we meet back again tomorrow, then we could kind of review that as a team and then start breaking out the features. And then that's something that we're hoping that you would be able to kind of elaborate those features. And then we could meet back with the team to kind of review them. If that's
cool. You're talking about like a more detailed version of this same epic?
Yeah, so basically just elaborating this epic. So if there's any changes that you want to see in here, go ahead and make those. We can have those conversations on the sig-stacks Slack as well. So however you want to do that. But then these are basically like feature level issues, and so we kind of broke them out initial cut for, we need a design doc that says, like, here's these 3 commands, maybe the vision, like all that stuff, and then that we would create an issue for that.
Okay, so edits and issues then is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what we're trying to get to tomorrow is, is this list correct? And do you want to tweak it in any way? And if so, please do.
We all have access to this too, to the ... edit, and GitHub does keep track of the history of these description changes now too. So I think it's fair to just treat these like Word docs and go at them.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally.
And one question then, do we have somewhere else where we describe what we're imagining for install and uninstall?
So that's not in scope here, but we could potentially consider it as part of this design doc. But one of the key things that we're trying to get done is using like the build and the push for building like the WordPress example, and then also for building and pushing the infrastructure stacks that are going to be created over here. So that instead of having to do manual commands for that we could actually use the tool and then kind of iterate on the tool.
Sure. Yeah, but I'm wondering, like, then what are we imagining? Is there somewhere where we describe how we're imagining install and uninstall working then, if they're not covered by?
Oh, so that would be that's a good point. So in here, it'd probably make sense to cover that as part of 6.12. And so if we don't have one already, we don't, so that's perfect. So we can basically add update the docs.
Cool.
Yeah, that's perfect. Cool. Okay. Whoops. All right. Yeah. So this is basically our Send Hub board, and we're currently discussing moving these to GitHub projects. But either way, this will all be public. So I will go back to my other view. So the roadmap that we've been walking through is an open draft PR. So I'm hoping to get this wrapped up today. So we'll see, but I'm sure there's a faster way to get there, but there we go. Okay. So any closing questions or comments on this one before we move on to the other stuff? Do you feel like, Daniel, you're in a good spot to kind of to go in and refine this for tomorrow?
Yeah, it's definitely related to the stuff I've started to think about this week. So I should be able to do some refinement today. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So then the infrastructure stack developer guide, that's something that Nick's going to be tackling. And basically we're looking at 2 primary scenarios to support here. One is saying, hey, if I'm an existing user and I have this GCP infrastructure stack and I need to add, a new cloud service that you guys don't support, can I do that? And how easily can I do that? And so it'll talk about, how to go about doing that, or even if there's, like additional fields that I need added to a resource class, how do I do that? How do I test it? So there's kind of different scenarios that we want to make it easy to contribute to these infrastructure stacks. And then also if you're, wanting to add support for, a cloud provider that we don't currently support, like Alibaba or Tencent or DigitalOcean or whatever, having an easy way to create a whole new infrastructure stack out of tree, and getting going with that. And then, what are the concepts that you're going to need to understand? And so we kind of bulleted out some items down here for that. And then this Crossplane glossary and concepts, that's actually the same issue as what we're going to have in 625, and so we can just move that there and then include that as a dependency. But you know, we need to get that list of these are the concepts and the terms that we're using, and that it's, you know, kind of the ubiquitous language, and then we start using that everywhere. So we have a start to that, and I think we probably take that to like a public markdown file that we could put in kind of like Crossplane core at the root, and then just have that be, you know, the thing. So we could have that be like an extended version of like concepts MD or glossary MD or something like that. And then the services folks would be predominantly taking this, but I think that having collaboration across squads on something like this, especially from like a developer UX perspective, would be a fine thing to do. So this isn't precluding that collaboration. It just Nick would be the primary owner because it's the infrastructure stack dev guide. And then we have the portable WordPress app stack. So this is a Cube Builder based app stack that's published to the registry. And so Jared elaborated this, and then we iterated on it over the last couple days. So I guess I'll just show that here. And this is all draft, so don't treat any of this as like written in stone or anything. This is just kind of roughing out the thoughts around this. So this one actually is going to be fairly important to get to quickly, at least the initial form of it, because it's going to be needed for moving the infrastructure stacks if we're going to be validating against the portable WordPress stack here.
So for this version of the WordPress stack, what are we imagining the controller doing?
So yeah, what like it should be able to take a user's like WordPress CRD or CR that they create an instance of, you know, watch for those, see it come in, and then, you know, whatever particular configuration we decide to expose on that WordPress CRD, translate that into a running, working set, you know, WordPress installation, which would be like the claim for the database, I guess the claim for the Kubernetes controller as well, and the WordPress like deployment and service as well. Basically, like taking the YAML that we have currently in our guides and you know, having a controller generate that basically.
Okay, cool. So we're imagining it as when you install the stack, it adds support for creating claims for infinite WordPresses.
Yeah, it would create, when you install the WordPress stack, there would be a new WordPress CRD that shows up, and then a running controller that's waiting to reconcile WordPress CRD instances.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, so the claims would get created when you instantiate the WordPress instance. So like you install the stack, it adds the CRDs, and then the controller is there monitoring for the CRDs. So when you instantiate the WordPress instance, so like a CR for the CRD for the WordPress app, then the controller would go and create a claim, and in this case, you know, assuming default resource classes. And so we would just create like probably like a single MySQL claim per WordPress instance that you deploy.
Right. Cool.
Cool. No cursing on the channel, Jared.
Yeah, sorry there. I got hooked on my chair, and then my headphone, my head got yanked down. My ears. I still have 2 ears, I think, after that incident. Apologies.
Is it wrong to use the word claim in? Is claim just the wrong word to use when you're thinking about the WordPress?
WordPress, yeah, I think that's accurate, Marcus. Yes, it's just, you know, creating a custom resource, like, you know, an instance of the WordPress CRD.
So it is the statement that claim is wrong is accurate.
Yes.
Well, in the context of like provisioning an app instance. So when you provision an app instance, you just provision like, here's the settings for this app, and you say, go give me an instance of this app. And then the controller, like that's going to go and create claims.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Cool. I'm foreseeing myself reusing claim in the wrong way now. Like, I'm creating a claim for an object in Go.
You can use it in the wrong way. You're gonna order a claim chowder.
I know. Ooh, good one.
Watch out, Daniel. Got Marcus coming in hot on your back.
I found that I've been using puns a lot more, Daniel, now that we've been hanging out for a little bit. So
I think you'll still have to make a few more before you can challenge my claim to the title market.
Oh.
no, you're king of the claims. So yeah, so that's basically the portable WordPress app stack. So if we can get this elaborated and just kind of tuned up, Daniel, for kind of walkthrough tomorrow. There's a fair bit of detail here. There's some shorthand notation. So I think that there's more work that needs to be done to kind of get this totally dialed in, but I think we're pretty close. But again, any changes you want to make, just go for it and we can walk through it tomorrow. But
Cool.
when I was walking through this with Jared, we kind of put these here. So like create a WordPress controller in CRD, package and publish the WordPress stack. So they're now in the registry so that anybody can basically pull it and install it. And then that would probably be good enough for what we need in the 6.12, moving the infrastructure stacks. And then if we can actually build this using the stack CLI tool or whatever we end up doing for that, whether it's like a cube control plugin or whatnot, then it would need to be updated potentially to be built with that. So like if we have this example working in the environment and then new users can like copy it and say, oh, like I have a working copy of the WordPress stack being built and publishing, then I can like start modifying it and then make it do my own application, right? And so, folks will probably be using this as a reference. And so having the stacks tooling for building and publishing to the registry would be totally awesome. And then of course, user guides and examples that makes it even easier for new users to get started. And maybe even like a blog post or something, that would be kind of cool if you're up for that type of thing.
Yep, love writing guides and posts and stuff.
Cool.
Cool. Okay, I'll take a look at this one also.
Awesome. So that's basically it for stacks, although this is kind of going to be a shared epic. And so just to kind of reiterate a couple points. Get my Seafair without even going to Seafair. So what we're really trying to get to is, we've made this ton of progress in 0.2, and we need to get it updated to reflect all the stuff we've done in 0.3, provide a better new user onboarding experience, and make it easier for contributors to get started. And so there's this clustering of terms that we just talked about, getting the docs kind of more curated and updated to reflect the 0.3 issues. And this is more of validating that that's been done as part of the other epics, in the sense that as we're doing features in epics, we should be updating the docs as we go. So for example, like if we go back to Dan's strongly typed classes here. Whoops, wrong one. So this basically is going to be updating the user guide and docs for this aspect, and then updating all the examples to go from generic classes to strongly typed classes. And so we're kind of breaking those out as sub-features. And so if epics that you're working on don't have those two things, then those should get dropped in as features for the epics that you're working on. And then when we come back to this refreshing the 0.3 docs, it's mainly just making sure that everything is, consistent, and hoping that the bulk of the consistency is driven around having this glossary and concepts published early, like in the next week would be ideal. And so I'll take point on that, and then enlist everybody's help to kind of get to a ubiquitous language around that. And then it's verifying the docs have been updated to reflect all the things.
I think that our glossary and concepts, like we need another diagram for some of these, the resource classes and the various names that we have we need a visual. That's my point.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Marcus. That's really good feedback.
I had another question also.
Oh, and real quick, Daniel, before you ask that, Marcus, do you want to add that item, like a updated visual, or add a diagram for the concepts to the issue that we're tracking the glossary and concept stuff in?
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to actually break it out as a separate line item, I think that would be a fine thing too. I dropped it in here so you can remove mine and add an additional line.
Oh, that's fine right there. Either way. Okay, Daniel, sorry, what was your question?
Oh, no worries. So my question was, if we're updating the docs and stuff as we go, do we also want to be updating the change log or release notes type thing as we go?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Daniel, that we have not been following that policy at all. We have a pending release notes file, and that I can't remember, is that part of the pull request template still? But I had put that there a while ago, and I don't think anyone's followed it at all. We are really good about that in the Rook project, but we have not been doing that in Crossplane, and that makes the release notes a lot more difficult to write at the end of the milestone.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really good point, man.
Okay. Yeah, I opened it for the first time this week, and I was like, oh, I should probably be updating this when I'm making changes.
Yeah, we've misstepped on that one this milestone.
Cool.
Retro.
Yeah, when we can retroactively go back and look at the PRs that have landed and just kind of drop in summaries of the key things. So yeah, but getting on top of that, that's a great point, Daniel. So I dropped this in here. So feel free to tweak that if you have better wording.
Okay. Seems good to me. As for the words release notes in it. So.
Right. Yeah, and so then this last one, I'm going to drop in the link to that issue, but it's mainly just getting some pipeline examples for how to use Crossplane services in Jenkins and GitLab pipelines, and then GitOps flow, and doing that both for kind of GCP examples and AWS stacks. And this is mainly just to kind of enable faster getting started for new users, so that they can be like, oh, I'm using Jenkins and AWS Stack, and here's an example of how one might use that, and then they can just use that for reference. And then it might impact if we run into like usability issues in that flow, that might impact the developer experience as well in terms of improved tooling and whatnot. So yeah. All right.
Cool.
I think we're looking
Got through all of them in under the hour.
Yeah.
Nice.
Any closing comments or kind of just as a recap for tomorrow. So kind of looking for everybody to go through the epics that they're going to be focusing on, see if there's any changes that they'd like, make sure that the related features that are broken down underneath them, that you're happy with kind of the titles and stuff for those. If you want to add or remove things, like go for that. And then we'll just review that tomorrow briefly, and then we can start breaking out the feature issues and get a couple of those on deck, I guess, for sprint planning on Monday, and we're ready to hit the ground running. So Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good one, and I'll see you online.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you guys.